Her daughter-in-law tossed a $2,000 Chanel cape into the donate box without asking. Miriam Sloan, former Smithsonian consultant, just smiled and picked up her pen. By morning, Sienna's credit card was funding wardrobes for foster teens she'd never meet. The house, still under Miriam's name. The trust, recently amended. She'd once raised a son. Now she was raising the standard, and when they came asking what happened, she handed them the receipts. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The morning light filtered softly through the kitchen's reclaimed wood blinds, pooling on the concrete countertop like spilled cream. Miriam Sloan stepped in barefoot, the hem of her slate blue robe grazing the floor with a whisper. She moved like someone who had never needed to announce her presence to be noticed. On the breakfast island sat a cardboard box labeled in pink Sharpie, "Drop off Goodwill." The tape was already half sealed. She didn't need to look. She already knew. Still, her hands moved gently, almost reverently, as she peeled back the top flap and reached inside. Folded beneath a pair of athleisure leggings and a discarded candle holder was her jacket. Vintage Harris tweed. Forest green. Wool from Scotland. Hand-stitched lining, French seams. She had worn it the year she defended her dissertation in textile history, the year her husband gifted her the matching gloves. It was crumpled like trash. Footsteps. Sienna Sloan breezed in, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. Her high-waisted cream trousers looked tailored, but Miriam could spot fast fashion construction a mile away. She wore a minimalist gold chain that probably had its own hashtag. "Oh, that," Sienna said, catching Miriam's glance. "Your closet's overflowing, so I did a sweep. Your clothes are too old, donate them." She said it like she was doing Miriam a favor. Miriam didn't answer. She simply reached into the box, lifted the jacket out slowly, and ran her palm across the sleeve. A speck of lint clung near the lapel. She flicked it off with precision. Jake wandered in next, earbuds in, eyes glued to his phone screen. He kissed Sienna's temple absently, muttered something about a client meeting, and poured himself cold brew from the fridge without so much as looking up. "Miriam," he said absently, only glancing her way after a beat. She nodded, jacket in hand. "Good morning, Jake." "Morning," he said, already half out of the room, scrolling again. "Cool jacket." Sienna gave a tight smile. "See? Even Jake agrees. It's time to let things go." Miriam turned without a word, box in arms now, and walked back down the hallway toward her guest suite. The door shut with a soft but final click. Inside, the air was cooler. She always kept it 2 degrees below the rest of the house. Her sanctuary. Walls painted oyster gray, a window seat with a view of the Flatirons, and in the corner her cedar trunk. She placed the box beside it and knelt, sliding open the brass latch. The scent of lavender sachets and polished wood drifted upward, and for a moment her breath caught, not from effort but memory. Piece by piece, she pulled the jacket's siblings from the trunk, a hand-beaded silk shift from 1963, a wool capelet from a Paris flea market, gloves wrapped in tissue, each pair dated in fountain pen. She laid the rescued jacket in its rightful place among them, smoothing it lovingly, as if placing a child to bed. Her phone chimed. "April, the vintage show is next month. Still interested in loaning your collection?" Miriam looked down at the screen. Her fingers hovered for a moment before she typed, "Miriam, yes. Confirm my spot on the panel. I'll bring the originals." She set the phone down gently. Then, with a quiet steadiness, she returned to the cardboard box, now half filled with the curated cast-offs Sienna had chosen on her behalf. Miriam's hand slipped inside, retrieving a faded pink cashmere twin set. She turned it over in her hands, then folded it neatly, and returned it to the trunk. She would decide what had value. She always had. Miriam didn't sleep that night, not from unrest, but from focus. While the rest of the house exhaled into darkness, Sienna's soft giggles leaking from the primary suite, Jake's footsteps pacing the hallway during a late Zoom call, Miriam sat at her writing desk beneath the glow of her banker's lamp. Her fingers moved deliberately over yellowed folders, manila envelopes, and binders with spine labels in her husband's handwriting. Household Projects 2005-2018. A glass of lemon water sat untouched beside a legal pad already half filled with her notes. Names, numbers, invoices, initials. She flipped through a bound remodel ledger, her pencil tapping once as she paused on a page labeled Solar Roof Installation. Total $78,200. Her own signature. Her own trust. Paid in full. Miriam's brow furrowed only slightly as she reached for the next set. Interior renovation, guest suite expansion, gray water system. Line by line, she traced the flow of money like she was following fabric grain, quiet but precise. There it was again and again, M. Sloan Trust. A sticky note fluttered to the floor. It read, "Don't forget water reclamation grant. Ask Trent." She smiled faintly. Trent's office sat 2 blocks off Pearl Street, wedged between a legal firm and an eco-chic gelato shop with flavors like birch and sea salt. The receptionist greeted her with genuine warmth. Trent had insisted on keeping his practice small, like finance used to be before everyone tried to make it sexy. He rose from his desk the moment she entered, tugging his tie slightly looser. "Miriam Sloan," he said with a half smile. "I've missed this quiet authority you carry." "Save the flattery," she replied gently, placing a worn leather folder in front of him. "I need the paperwork updated. All of it." They reviewed everything, slowly, carefully. Her role on the house title co-owner. Her role on the trust sole and irrevocable authority. The power of attorney hadn't been touched in nearly a decade. Trent glanced up. "You sure about this clause? It's not subtle." "That's the point." He nodded, starting the draft. "What do you want to call it?" She considered for a moment. "Benevolent redirection." Trent arched a brow. "That's poetic. What does it mean?" She looked out the window, watching a sparrow land on the ledge. "It means if they want to inherit peace, they'll need to learn how to live without war." Later that week, Jake knocked gently on her suite door. "Hey Mom, got a sec?" She closed her ledger, inviting him in with a nod. He stood near the armchair, holding a cappuccino he'd probably bought for show. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to float a loan. Just short term. One of our bigger clients had a payment delay, and Sienna and I were thinking of expanding the studio." Miriam tilted her head. "You're requesting funds from the trust?" His ears turned slightly pink. "Well, yeah, but not like a handout. It'd be professional." "I'll review the numbers," she said simply, and tapped her pen against the notepad in her lap. "It's under consideration." Jake looked vaguely relieved, but uneasy. "Cool. Appreciate it." As soon as he left, she wrote one word beneath his name on the page. "Pending." That night, the glow of Sienna's ring light lit the hallway in soft pink hues. From the slightly ajar media room, Miriam could hear her rehearsing takes. "Some of y'all still out here dressing like you're stuck in 1962. Babe, it's giving mothballs." Cut. "Fashion isn't memory, it's momentum." Cut. "Grandma core? Yeah, it's a thing, but don't make it your whole personality." Miriam stood quietly, just outside the door. Sienna hadn't noticed. Inside, a garment rack wheeled past the frame, half of it filled with muted tones, synthetic knits, and a few pieces that looked suspiciously familiar. Her vintage brocade vest among them. Miriam turned, walked back to her room, and opened a fresh page in her journal. At the top, she wrote, Phase 1, Observation. Next, action with receipts. The flyer was tucked between an anthropology catalog and a glossy real estate postcard. Its pastel palette tried hard to be effortless, muted sage with serif fonts, and a soft focus photo of oversized sunglasses perched on a coffee table book. Miriam flipped it over slowly, her thumb pausing on the event title, Style Refresh Workshop, Generational Looks That Don't Age You, curated by Sienna Sloan. Her name wasn't mentioned, not even as guest of, just the return address, the Sloan residence. There was no invitation, no conversation, just paper dropped like a suggestion disguised as decor. She let the flyer fall to the console table, smoothing a hand over her silk blouse. That morning, she had ironed it crisp, buttoned to the collarbone, and paired it with her tortoiseshell earrings, gifts from her husband on their 20th anniversary. He'd said she looked like someone who knew the value of restraint. The irony wasn't lost on her. The day of the event, the living room had been transformed into what Sienna called a curated casual space, rattan stools arranged in a semicircle, a folding mirror rimmed with LED lights, and a eucalyptus-scented diffuser puffing out fragrance like pretense. Sienna stood near the mirror, dressed in neutral tones with sculptural earrings and a linen wrap top that screamed YouTube sponsorship. "Oh, you came," she said, momentarily stunned. "I live here." Miriam replied simply, stepping forward in wide-legged trousers and a structured blouse. Draped over her arm was a garment bag. Sienna glanced at it. "You didn't need to bring anything." "I thought this was a style workshop," Miriam said mildly. "I brought something timeless." She unzipped the bag, revealing a pristine Chanel cape in soft cream wool. It had a subtle black trim and hand-covered buttons that gleamed like polished bone. The room went silent for half a breath. Sienna blinked. "That's vintage." "Indeed," Miriam said, and hung it delicately on a nearby chair. One of the younger women in the room whispered, "That's Chanel Atelier work, right? Like Carl?" Miriam simply smiled. Half an hour into the session, Sienna held up a plastic jewelry tray. "For our next segment, we're going to talk about accessorizing to modernize," she chirped. "Sometimes all it takes is swapping out fussy pieces for something fresh." She turned to Miriam, offering a set of oversized resin hoops and a clunky necklace that looked like a knockoff from a craft store clearance bin. "These could really lift your look," she said brightly. Miriam took the pieces gently, studying them like a scientist considering a failed experiment. She didn't speak, just set them back on the tray with precise care. Silence prickled the edges of the room. At that moment, the front door clicked open. A familiar voice called from the foyer. "Hope I'm not late." April swept in, sharp, graceful, and unmistakably in her element. She wore a fitted navy sheath dress and carried a structured bag that could probably outvalue half the room. Her eyes met Miriam's. "Didn't realize you were previewing today's panel." Sienna stiffened. "Panel?" April tilted her head. "For the vintage fundraiser next week." "Miriam's speaking, right?" A pause thickened the air like steam. Sienna blinked, then forced a laugh. "Oh, that I didn't realize you were booked." "I confirmed last week," Miriam said softly, eyes resting on her daughter-in-law. "They asked me to speak on textile preservation and historical fashion ethics." Someone near the back murmured, "That sounds incredible." April smiled, then addressed the room. "There's a reason her collection is being considered for institutional archiving." Sienna stood frozen, her fingers still wrapped around the plastic necklace. Miriam turned back to the cape, lifting it from the chair and laying it gently across her arm. "Shall I show them what dignity looks like when it's tailored?" The sewing room had once been a nursery. Jake's, back when the walls were pale blue and painted with hot air balloons. Now it was a space reclaimed, meticulously ordered bolts of fabric arranged by decade garment bags lined up like soldiers. A magnifying lamp perched above the drafting table like a silent sentinel. Miriam sat with her shoulders squared, glasses low on her nose, and a bone-handled seam ripper in her right hand. She wasn't altering anything, she was taking inventory. Each garment lay on muslin cloth, examined, measured, photographed. Her handwriting still crisp after 74 years, tagged every piece designer, fabric, acquisition year, provenance. On a side table, her laptop blinked open to an appraiser's live chat window. April's voice echoed through the speakers. "Hold that one up again." "Yep, silk crepe. Early 70s. That embroidery along the collar? Probably hand done. I'll run it by the archive panel." Miriam adjusted the blouse carefully beneath the light. "It was a gift from Lorna Thayer," she said. "We worked together at the Smithsonian." She swore the detailing was Armenian. April let out a low whistle. "If it checks out, that piece alone is worth over $4,000, possibly more with provenance." Miriam didn't smile, but her fingers still just a second longer on the fabric's edge, like touching a friend who'd returned after years apart. Later that evening, after the sun dipped behind the flatirons, she moved from fabric to finance. At her desk, she removed a single checkbook from a locked drawer, the one linked to her household account, the one Jake and Sienna assumed paid for everything from groceries to landscaping to their monthly spa memberships. She opened a new file in her encrypted account. The title read, Ledger Split, Quiet Mode. In silence, she began rerouting. Electricity and water would now debit directly from the trust. Trash and lawn services, prepaid quarterly under a corporate name. Household contributions would continue, but from now on they'd be monitored, traced, and assigned purpose. Then came the Amex. She hovered for a moment. It had been tied to the house for years, used by all through them. She never questioned it until the past few months, when it started carrying charges that didn't align with her spreadsheet. Organic wine subscriptions, digital stylist consulting, and last month a $3,200 charge for what Sienna had called brand elevation photography. Miriam delinked the card from the main trust. She assigned it instead to a limited prepaid account, $200 per month. Auto reloading. Enough to cover real necessities, if they even noticed. She leaned back in her chair. The software displayed a green checkmark, and the words card successfully reassigned. She pressed print on the updated contribution ledger and slipped the document into her Cedar file box under the tab.
Transition.
Phase 2. The first reaction came 3 days later. Miriam heard it through the floorboards. From the kitchen below, the sound of Sienna's voice sharpening like a stileta's edge. What do you mean it declined? She snapped into her phone. No, it's the same card we always use. I just bought from that brand last week. Pause. I know what it's linked to. It's a household card. This is probably a glitch. Ugh, whatever. Miriam remained still in her armchair above, sipping chamomile and tracing a hemline in her sketchbook. Moments later, footsteps stormed up the stairs, stopping short outside her door. A quick, sharp knock. Hey, Jake called, trying to keep his voice level. Do you know if the Amex has been acting weird? Sienna tried to use it, and Miriam opened the door halfway. There have been some account updates, she said calmly. All essentials are still covered. Jake scratched the back of his neck. It just feels sudden. Some things needed stitching, Miriam said. Others needed to be unpicked. He didn't understand, but he nodded like he might someday want to. The thumbnail alone told Miriam everything. Sienna stood in front of the walk-in closet mirror, phone angled high, ring light haloing her face. She wore cream on beige, sleek hair tucked behind one ear, and in her hand, dangling like a prop, was Miriam's brocade vest, the one she'd cataloged just last week under early 70s. Provenance confirmed. The caption read, Closet cleanout. What even is this? #grandma core gone wrong. #donate that drama. She tapped play. Sienna's voice, bright and breezy, poured through the speaker. So I found this little gem, looks like something you'd wear to brunch at a retirement castle in 1974. She laughed. I mean, why are we hoarding fashion that belongs in a dusty archive? She held the vest to the camera, then dropped it into a box labeled thrift or trash. Miriam sat perfectly still in her sewing chair, the vest's actual twin draped neatly on the mannequin beside her. Its hand-done embroidery caught the morning light, the golden threads shimmering like something alive. She didn't comment. She didn't text. She just opened her saved videos folder and dragged in a clip from her last catalog session, the one April had casually filmed during their authentication call. It started with Miriam lifting the vest gently from its wrap, laying it on the table, and running her hands along the seams. This one was done by a seamstress who didn't believe in shortcuts, she said in the clip, voice low and warm. No overlocks, no glue. Every hem is hand-tacked. That's not just craftsmanship. That's memory stitched in intention. April's voice in the background. You sound like a museum docent with better posture. They had both laughed softly. Miriam smiled, watching it again. Then she sent the file to April with a simple message. Post it, no edits. The next 48 hours unfolded like spilled thread unraveling across social media. April reposted the full behind the scenes with the caption, "What you missed when fashion becomes a joke instead of a legacy." #textile truths. The algorithm did the rest. The contrast was brutal. Clips of Sienna's smug commentary juxtaposed with Miriam's gentle, articulate narration. One TikTok creator even ran them side by side, captioned, "When grandma has more style than you." The comments were merciless. "Miriam's voice is literal silk. This woman taught at the Smithsonian and her deal is mocking her on TikTok? Now I want to wear vintage and call my grandmother. Miriam Sloan is a national treasure. Protect her at all costs." Sienna for once said nothing. Jake had tried damage control. He posted a vaguely apologetic story. "We're all learning together. Fashion is personal, but so is legacy." No one bought it. On Sunday morning, a folded copy of the Boulder Citizen sat on the doorstep. Miriam spotted it while watering the thyme on the porch. The front page lifestyle feature was titled, "Elegance Has a Name, Miriam Sloan's Quiet Fashion Rebellion." The pull quote read, "Style is what remains after the trends expire." She didn't need to read the article. She already knew who she was. She simply cut out the clipping, tucked it into a folder labeled Press Personal, and went back inside. That afternoon, she forwarded the original clip to Trent with a brief message, "Time to activate the respect clause." Within an hour, he responded, "Done. Updated trust draft will reflect a dignity standard for future eligibility. Want me to send you the summary?" Miriam replied, "Send it to the house printer. I think they'll be curious." The dress waited in its acid-free box, like a kept secret. Miriam unfolded the muslin slowly, her fingers brushing against the silk's cool weight. Pale blush, hand-sewn with cap sleeves and a perfectly inset bateau neckline. She hadn't worn it since 1965, the night she and Robert attended the opening of the Denver Museum's textile wing. He had stood beside her in a tailored tux, whispering, "You look like history motion." Tonight she would wear it again, not for nostalgia, but as proof that elegance wasn't a trend. The fundraiser was hosted at the Boulder Art Guild, a minimalist glass and stone building tucked into the side of the hill like a sculpture that never needed to explain itself. Inside, the space buzzed. Artists, donors, archivists, and curators moved through candlelit cocktail rounds and display panels draped with vintage pieces donated for auction. April found her at the entrance. "You look, my God, Miriam." Her voice caught. "That dress should be behind velvet rope." Miriam gave a soft smile. "Let it walk a little longer before we put it behind glass." The air inside was cool but reverent, murmured voices rising and falling like the shifting tide. When April stepped to the mic, the room eased into silence. "Our next speaker," she said, her voice firm and warm, "is not just a contributor to this collection. She is a living archive. A woman who has preserved not just fabric but memory, dignity, and the craftsmanship of generations. Please welcome Miriam Sloan." Applause began as a ripple and swelled before she even reached the podium. Miriam moved without rush, the silk of her dress catching every light like it remembered how to perform. She didn't adjust the mic, she didn't clear her throat. She simply looked out at the crowd, then let her gaze settle at the very back of the room, where Sienna stood, arms folded, lips pressed, a forced smile fixed like lacquer. "I was taught," Miriam began, her voice low and clear, "that clothing is never just about covering the body. It's how we write ourselves into the world." The crowd leaned in. No coughing, no shifting. "I've worn dresses stitched by women who never signed their names, but left their genius in every seam. I've preserved garments made during wartime rationing, and garments stitched for weddings that never happened. Each one matters, not because of trend, but because of care." A breathless stillness. Even the waitstaff had paused. Miriam rested her palm gently on the podium. "Age is not clutter," she said. "It's curated experience. And if you call that hoarding, then I suppose I've hoarded a great deal of meaning." Applause again, this time thundering. From the back, Sienna's jaw tightened. A woman beside her leaned in and whispered something. Sienna's expression flickered. recognition, then something close to embarrassment. She said nothing. Miriam bowed her head slightly, stepped down and returned to her table without fuss. Her chair had been placed beside a framed photo of her 1965 exhibit, she and Robert in grayscale, smiling under gallery lights. She sat with the same grace she'd carried all her life, posture intact, expression composed, hands folded in her lap. After the final speaker, donors circled her like planets orbiting gravity. Would you consider consulting on our textile wing renovation? You belong in a documentary. My daughter wants to study historical design now, because of you. April handed her a glass of sparkling water and leaned close. You just silenced every smug reel she's ever posted. Miriam didn't glance at Sienna. She didn't need to. She simply said, a voice raised for ego never outlasts, a voice raised for memory. The guest house sat just 2 blocks from Chautauqua Park, tucked behind a row of cottonwoods, its slate roof barely visible from the road. It had once belonged to a retired landscape painter who hosted plein-air workshops and baked cardamom bread for her students. Now it belonged to Miriam Sloan. The deed bore one name. She signed the final transfer papers in a quiet corner of the title office, dressed in a soft dove-gray cardigan and slacks. No jewelry, no entourage, just her fountain pen, her wire-frame glasses, and a cup of Earl Grey in a porcelain travel cup. Trent had handled the escrow.
Hey.
Donated or leased, he'd asked, flipping through the file. Gifted, she replied. Fully. To the Design Forward initiative. Let the next generation make something that outlives a hashtag. He smiled, a flicker of pride in his eyes. I'll write it up. No press release, no social media post. Just a legal document and a key passed to a stunned young program director, with tears in her eyes and a voice that cracked when she whispered, they'll never believe this was real. The next morning, Sienna's voice rang from the kitchen like a fire alarm in heels. Maxed out, she shrieked into her phone. That's impossible. I haven't even bought anything overweight. What are these charges? What is Closet Lift Project? Miriam calmly stirred her oatmeal upstairs. She already knew the charges: 10 boxes of carefully curated professional attire, blazers, trousers, loafers, and handbags pulled from her own preserved collection, each one packaged with handwritten notes of encouragement. Each box delivered to a local foster support program for teens aging out of the system, each one funded by the Amex. The same Amex that Sienna had insisted was just household, which legally was still co-linked to a property. Miriam had paid 70% of and never surrendered ownership on. She'd kept every receipt. Later that day, Jake knocked gently on her suite door, his voice cautious. Mom? Miriam opened the door partway, as she always did now. Jake rubbed his jaw, unshaven. Look, we got this fraud alert from Amex, Sienna freaked. It says there were multiple charitable charges, and when we tried to dispute them, they said it's legit. It is, Miriam said evenly. The card is attached to a shared asset. The charges are properly categorized, and the cause was, I assure you, quite charitable. Jake blinked. So you used it? I redirected it, she replied. To a place where clothing still has purpose. He shifted his weight. We just didn't mean to, he stopped. I mean, we didn't mean it like that. The way things came off, the workshop, the reel, the fundraiser, it all spiraled. Miriam regarded him for a long moment. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the bags under his eyes, the dull sheen of someone realizing too late that something sacred had been mishandled. I'm not interested in how it came off, she said gently, only in how it was allowed. Jake's shoulders fell. We'll fix it, he said softly. We'll try. She didn't answer. He lingered another second, then nodded and backed away down the hallway like someone leaving a room they no longer had the right to enter. That night, Miriam stood on the porch of the guest house beneath a harvest moon, watching Eva, one of the initiative's volunteers, help assemble sewing machines along a row of long reclaimed tables. Young hands moved through the space like they already belonged there. Eva looked up. I still can't believe this is real. It is, Miriam said. But don't believe it. Build it. Inside the house, the foyer was empty. No mirrors, no ring lights, just bolts of raw muslin, walls painted eggshell white, and a sense that nothing here needed to be posted to prove it had value. Trent's office was quiet but alive with the hum of consequence. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, catching the brass edges of his vintage drafting ruler and the steam from his coffee cup. Miriam sat opposite him, wrapped in a charcoal shawl, the corners of her eyes drawn but steady. She wasn't here for sentiment, just clarity. I finalized the revisions this morning, Trent said, sliding the document across the table. You're no longer legally obligated to list Jake or Sienna as primary beneficiaries. With the dignity clause already enacted, this solidifies everything. Miriam read each line without needing to ask what it meant. Her pen moved with slow intention as she signed the final page. And you're sure about the re-entry clause? He asked. Yes, she said. If they want to earn back what they thought was automatic, they'll need to do the work. Trent nodded. 3 years of direct care. Documented, verified by third party. She placed the pen down. They may never qualify, but the offer will be there. That's more mercy than most would give. It's not mercy, she said. It's structure. They like structure when they're the ones building it. He smiled faintly, then slipped the signed pages into a folder stamped in gold. Sloan Trust. Amended deed conditions. The next morning, Miriam moved through her routine with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer owed explanations. Tea steeped, blouse pressed, trunk locked. When she stepped outside to tend the porch ferns, her phone buzzed with a notification she almost ignored, until she saw the photo. Sienna Sloan to Bemichu, caption, thrilled to announce our newest project space in South Boulder. Creativity needs room to breathe, and we finally have it. Big things coming. Attached was a filtered image of the guesthouse porch, the same one where Eva had handed Miriam a set of donated shears just days before. Miriam's expression didn't change, but she tapped the screen, scrolled to the comments, and saw it, a dozen congratulatory replies, likes stacking fast. The illusion was working, until it wasn't. 3 minutes later, a new comment appeared beneath the post. From April, at April Holland's archive. Strange. That property was gifted in full to the Design Forward Foundation by Miriam Sloan. Check the deed. A beat of silence in the digital crowd. Then another comment, and another. Wait, what? Are they trying to take credit for a donation? Girl, this ain't it. Yikes. Just yikes. Sienna tried to edit the caption, then deleted it entirely, but the screenshot had already been shared. Inside the guest house, Eva was setting up a mentorship schedule on the whiteboard when her phone buzzed with a message from Miriam. Miriam, may I stop by this afternoon? With something for the archive room, she replied instantly. EVA. Of course, want me to meet you at the porch. Miriam, no need. I still have the key. It's mine to open. Back at the main house, Sienna paced in the kitchen, phone in one hand, the other running through her hair like she could smooth over the unraveling. Jake, it's a disaster. They're calling me a fraud in the comments. She must have set this up. This whole thing. We didn't even know she gave that place away. Jake, seated at the dining table with his laptop open to the amended trust summary, didn't answer right away. He was staring at the new clause again, the one that spelled it out with no ambiguity. Reinstatement of inheritance consideration, Clause 14.2. 3 years of verified direct care, minimum 20 hours per week. No exceptions. She didn't set us up, he said finally, voice low. She just stopped cleaning up after us. The invitation came in linen paper envelopes, sealed with wax and embossed in gold. It was addressed to artists, donors, preservationists, design mentors, and the young women now apprenticing at the guest house. Each one arrived with a handwritten note from Miriam Sloan. Legacy isn't inherited, it's invested in. Nowhere on the list were Jake or Sienna, not by accident, not by oversight, by design. The garden bloomed at golden hour. Miriam's backyard, once home to mismatched patio furniture, and Jake's abandoned fire pit project had been transformed. Lanterns hung from trellises. Strings of Edison bulbs arched above a long reclaimed farm table set with vintage linen runners and mismatched porcelain. Every detail was intentional, down to the antique sewing bobbins holding place cards. Miriam wore her midnight blue raw silk coat, one she hadn't touched in 30 years. The hem had been redone by hand last week with Eva's help, the stitches small, deliberate, a shared task passed between generations like a whispered recipe. April stood near the dessert table, fussing over the lemon tarts. Eva moved between guests like she belonged here, which Miriam realized she did. Near the end of the evening, as the cicadas began to hum and the scent of lavender drifted from the herb beds, April stepped to the microphone. "If I could have your attention just for a moment," she said, raising a glass. "Tonight isn't just a celebration of fabric. It's a celebration of foundation, what it takes to preserve, to pass down, to choose quality over ego." She turned toward Miriam. "We don't get many examples of dignity done quietly anymore. But you, Miriam, you showed us how to honor history without asking for applause. Applause anyway." Eva stepped forward, holding a framed certificate. "Miriam," she said, voice steady, "on behalf of Design Forward, the archive board, and every girl who now walks a little taller after touching your collection." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "We present you with the inaugural Legacy of Design Award." Miriam didn't speak right away. She reached for Eva's hand first, then the frame. When she did speak, her voice was soft but clear. "You taught me something too," she said, eyes meeting Eva's. "That memory is only half of what fabric carries. The other half is value. And value," she added, glancing at the crowd, "isn't about what something costs. It's about what someone learned to hold sacred." Another round of applause swelled around her, this time warmer, more personal. She nodded in gratitude, then sat as the string tree rims for women in a canopy of light. Down the street, headlights idled behind the hedges. Sienna sat in the car, lips tight, watching silhouettes move across the lawn. Laughter, clinking glasses, a swell of violin, the glow of cameras flashing and heels clicking on the stone walk. "She's doing this to provoke me," Sienna said through gritted teeth. Jake sat in the passenger seat, silent. No post, no public invite, no announcement, and it's still everywhere, she muttered, scrolling through her phone. Her feed was already clogged with tagged photos from donors, museum curators, local creatives. An unforgettable evening with Miriam Sloan, our textile matriarch. #Legacy of Design #. Miriam made Jake looked up from his lap. "Maybe it's not about you." She shot him a look. "But that house," she said, pointing through the windshield, "is still half ours." "No," he interrupted quietly. "It's not." He handed her the latest notice from the trust attorney. She snatched it, unfolded it, and read the stamped line across the bottom. "Property rights severed. Formal removal of co-ownership. Jake Sloan and Sienna Sloan." Her hands trembled as she reread the clause. "She can't." "She did," he said. The email hit her inbox, just after 6 a.m. Its subject line in all caps. "Final notice, partnership cancelled. Terms violation." Sienna blinked against the early light, mascara smudged from a half-slept night, and sat up in bed. She clicked it open. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Following a recent audit and public image review, we are terminating the campaign and requesting immediate removal of all brand material bearing our logo. Please note the financial discrepancy attached to your 2020 launch application has also voided contract renewal." Attached was a PDF she hadn't seen in 3 years. A grant application, itemized marketing expenses, the routing number at the bottom, familiar, but not hers. It was Miriam's retirement account, the same one she'd temporarily borrowed from with Jake's help. A bridge loan, they'd said. Nothing formal. That account had been closed 6 weeks ago. With it any legal plausible deniability that the brand had been built on her own merit. Sienna stared at the email like it might rewrite itself, then checked her profile. 2 sponsors gone. One quietly untagged her in their recent story post. Another had followed Eva's foundation page an hour ago. The world wasn't canceling her. It was simply rerouting. That afternoon, Eva sat cross-legged in the guesthouse studio, pencil in hand, sketching the collar of a wrap blouse inspired by a 1940s blueprint Miriam had donated from her archive. A mood board behind her showed swatches of wool crêpe, minimalist silhouettes, and post-war utility line. A label mock-up sat on the table beside her. Sloan Lineage, designed forward. April peeked in. That navy twill piece. Who's the model for that? Eva didn't look up. Nobody. It's not for the runway. It's for the girls. She gestured toward the racks. Professional wear, interview coats, transitional layering pieces, all made by hand, all sourced from Miriam's archived fabric bolts. She said we inherit more than closets. Eva added. We inherit standards. April smiled. Well, your mentor would be proud. Eva finally looked up. She still is. Miriam, meanwhile, stood in her sunroom, trimming back the rosemary with kitchen scissors dulled from actual use. A robin fluttered to the edge of the windowsill. She paused, watching it for a breath, then returned to pruning. Her phone chimed on the table beside her. A text from a journalist she vaguely remembered from the Boulder Citizen Gala circuit. Hey Miriam. Quick ask. NPR podcast wants to feature you. The fashion matriarch who took her name back. Huge audience. Would love to chat. She read it twice, then typed her reply. I've said what I needed to. The thread's already stitched. She powered the phone off and placed it gently on top of her linen notepad. Outside, a breeze rustled the edges of the garden. She left the scissors in the soil like a flag. Jake found Sienna in the kitchen that evening, a half-finished smoothie dripping down the side of the blender and her laptop open to yet another email with the subject line Urgent Press Accountability Request. They're not just pulling the deal, she said, eyes wide, voice hollow. They're asking for documentation of where the startup funds came from. I can't show a single invoice, not one without her name buried in it. Jake didn't speak. He'd spent the morning watching Eva's teaser video for Sloan Lineage rack up shares on Instagram, footage of teen designers, archival sketches and slow pans over Miriam's handwriting labeling each garment. Worn, treasured, passed on. You're not going to say anything, Sienna snapped. I think she already did, Jake said softly. The lake house hadn't changed. The dock still creaked with the same rhythm under Miriam's step. The pine trees still leaned inward like quiet sentinels, and the front porch light, though yellowed with age, still flickered to life the moment she turned the key. She stepped inside alone. The air smelled of cedar and old linen, her husband's scent still faint in the hall closet, where he used to keep his summer jackets. She walked through each room without hesitation, not looking for ghosts, just memories that had stayed folded where she left them. In the upstairs bedroom, she opened the garment armoire. There, sealed in acid-free wrap and marked in her looping pen, was the dress. A floor-length sleeveless sheath in cloud gray silk, fitted bodice, whisper hem. The dress she wore the night the National Textile Symposium honored her life's work. It had remained untouched since. This would be the piece. She removed it with care and laid it across the bedspread, smoothing the seams like prayer. April met her at the Boulder Museum's private preservation wing that afternoon, clipboard in hand. I've already spoken to the acquisitions board, she said. They're archiving it with the original sketches and your interview footage. And Miriam, her voice softened, they want to name the textile room after you. Miriam paused. Her hand was still resting on the silk, but her eyes didn't move. April stepped closer. You okay? Miriam nodded once, then reached up to adjust her collar. I didn't think it would matter. The name on the wall. It matters, April said gently. Especially because it's yours now. Only yours. Later that evening, the lake house glowed amber in the twilight. Miriam stood in the kitchen, pouring the last of the tea into a bone-white mug, when her phone buzzed. One new message. From Jake. Jake, is there anything left for us? No preamble. No defense. She stared at it for a long moment, then typed her reply. Slowly but without hesitation. Miriam, I left you a story. You chose the wrong ending. She set the phone face down. Outside, the moon was rising over the water, pale and indifferent. She returned to the guest room upstairs and folded the museum dress one last time. This time, she wrapped it in archival paper, stamped with the museum's seal. Then she packed it into a flat wooden box. Slipped in a photo of her and Robert from the year the fabric was purchased, him holding it like a gift, her laughing in surprise, and wrote on the envelope tucked beside it, "For the next one who understands that clothing like love is measured in care, not quantity." At the main house, Jake stood in the hallway outside the guest suite, holding his phone. The screen glowed with Miriam's message. He didn't knock. Sienna passed behind him with a load of laundry she'd finally started doing herself. She glanced at the closed door, then at Jake's face, and said nothing. Neither did he. They both knew. Whatever they had once stood to inherit was already gone. Not just the trust, not just the house, but the story. The museum smelled like climate control and quiet reverence, stone floors, soft light, and echoes of hushed footsteps. In the newly renamed Miriam Sloan Textile Gallery, glass cases lined the walls like reliquaries. Inside, time. A navy wool cape. The 1965 blush silk dress. The raw silk coat with its re-stitched hem. Delicate gloves, shoes, embroidered lapels, even the handwritten tags still affixed to some of the pieces, preserved in her signature cursive. Alongside them, a wall-length timeline mapped her career: Smithsonian Fellow, Archive Consultant, Mentor. And beside it, a polished brass plaque, preserved by Miriam Sloan, 2025 legacy is not passed down, it is protected. Tour groups drifted through, pausing with reverence in front of each display. A docent spoke softly to a group of schoolchildren. Every garment in this room was either worn, preserved, or hand-restored by Miriam Sloan herself. She archived over 1,200 textile pieces in her lifetime, many of which now inform modern design principles across the country. One little girl raised her hand. "Is she famous?" "She's important," the docent said. The girl nodded thoughtfully, staring into a glass case where a brocade vest shimmered beneath the lights. Sienna walked in quietly, unannounced. She wore large sunglasses and a trench coat, her heels muted on the tile. Her friend beside her, a fashion blogger with a sharp bob and designer tote, tilted her head as they passed a display. "Wait," the friend said, squinting. "She looks familiar. Didn't she try to copy that look on Insta a few years ago?" Sienna's mouth tensed. She said nothing. They paused in front of the 1940s wrap blouse, the one Eva had reinterpreted for Sloan Lindbergh's A Munch capsule. Underneath it, a label: Original Miriam Sloan, Seymour 1942. Reinterpreted E. Tran, 2025. A quiet collaboration across time. Sienna stepped closer to the glass, her own reflection layered faintly over the dress, like a ghost too late to matter. Behind her, a mother held her daughter's hand. "Mom," the girl whispered, pointing at a photo of Miriam seated at her work table, threads coiled around her fingers like gold. "Can I be like her when I'm old?" "You can start now," the mother said. Sienna turned away. Across town, in a sunlit community room at the Boulder Library, Miriam adjusted the tension knob on an old Singer sewing machine, while a teenager tried threading a bobbin for the first time. "No need to rush," Miriam said gently. "Let the thread catch at its own pace. Like learning to listen." The room was quiet, except for the hum of machines and soft laughter. A table in the corner held fabric scraps, mending kits, and half-finished projects waiting to be rescued. Eva poked her head in. "We're out of denim scraps." Miriam reached into a tote bag and handed her a folded bundle. These were left over from the archive build-out. Enough for a few skirts. Eva took them with a grin. "I keep thinking we're at the bottom of your collection, and then you pull out another bolt like a magician." "It's not magic," Miriam said. "It's stewardship." The last girl packed her machine and thanked her. Miriam nodded, watching her go. She reached down to pick up a fallen spool of thread, placed it back on the tray, and sat in the circle of emptied chairs, quiet now but still warm with presence. Across the room, a corkboard displayed pinned Polaroids from the past year, each girl holding a completed garment, their faces wide with pride. In the corner of the board, a quote was hand-lettered on cardstock. "Elegance isn't youth. It's memory stitched in dignity." She didn't remember writing it, but it sounded like her. The envelope arrived in the afternoon mail, heavy, cream-colored, sealed with Trent's professional watermark. Jake found it first, dropped among coupon ads and a real estate flyer on the front stoop. No fanfare, no forewarning. Just wait. He carried it inside with a growing sense of unease, placing it on the dining table like it might detonate. Sienna came in barefoot, coffee mug in one hand, scrolling through her phone with the other. "What's that?" she asked, eyeing the envelope. Jake didn't answer right away. He opened it slowly, carefully, sliding out a stack of typed documents clipped together at the corner. At the top, in bold serif font, Estate Contribution Ledger, M. Sloan Trust, 2003, 2024, and beneath that, prepared by T. Everly, CPA Authorized Release, Beneficiary Audit Copy. He scanned the first page, then the second, then the third. Line after line, remodel invoices, contractor payments, design fees, architectural deposits, appliance upgrades, solar installation, water reclamation, landscaping, every dollar tracked, every cent assigned. He flipped to the back page. Total contributions from M. Sloan Trust to household assets, $412,800. There was a sticky note on the last page. Handwritten, familiar ink. "Attached are the receipts you never thought I kept." M. Sienna stopped mid-sip. "What the hell is this?" Jake handed it over in silence. She flipped through it with increasing speed, color draining from her face. She documented all of it. "This goes back 2 decades. The entire remodel. The pool fence, my walk-in closet." Jake sat down, rubbing his jaw. "I didn't think she'd kept records." "She had them notarized," Sienna said, voice rising. "There are signatures, certified copies. She flipped another page. She logged the original down payment on the house." They looked at each other, then almost as one, reached for their phones. Miriam received the message just after sunset. She was in the garden, repotting thyme by moonlight, the soil cool and fragrant in her gloved hands. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. "Sienna, we were hoping to talk about everything. Maybe rebuild the relationship. Jake, can we meet? Just us. No paperwork." She stood still for a moment, listening to the breeze move through the branches overhead, then walked inside, washed her hands, dried them on a towel she'd had for decades, and sat at her writing desk. From a drawer she pulled out a single sheet of stationery, the good kind, thick and soft like pressed cotton. She wrote with a fountain pen, no salutation, no preamble. "Account closed." She folded the paper, placed it in an envelope, and dropped it at the corner mailbox on her evening walk. That same night, Trent's office sent an automated notification confirming the audit had been finalized and permanently filed with the trust archive. No appeals, no reviews, no options, just fact. Sienna sat on the sofa, staring at the ledger. "She didn't even tell us," she said, voice small now. "She just let us believe it was always shared, like it was ours." Jake looked down at the line item for his design firm's launch office. The security deposit had come from Miriam's trust. He hadn't even remembered that. "We thought silence meant consent," he said. Sienna shut the folder slowly. "It meant observation," she whispered. "And warning." The doors of the Boulder College Special Collections wing slid open with a hushed sigh, as if even the air understood it was entering sacred ground. Inside, students moved in quiet reverence through the newly launched Textile History through Personal Legacy exhibit. Climate-controlled glass cases stretched the length of the long room, each housing garments that were once touched daily, worn with intention, folded carefully by hand. Now they lived as artifacts, evidence of care in a world that had rushed too fast past it. At the center of the collection stood the piece that had started it all, the brocade vest, hand-stitched, hand-tagged. Beside it, in a small brass display frame, was a sketchbook open to a pencil rendering of the vest's hem detail, annotated in Miriam's unmistakable handwriting. A placard read, "Preserved from the Sloan Archive. Originally dismissed as scribbles, now a blueprint in legacy-led design education." Ava stood just beyond the viewing circle, clipboard in hand, a visitor badge clipped to her linen wrap top. Her posture had shifted over the past year, more grounded, more sure. She wasn't just a mentee now. She was staff, teaching assistant archive studies. She watched as students leaned closer to study the fine graphite lines, fingers hovering above the glass in awe. One girl pointed to a margin note written decades ago in fading blue ink. "Bias tape must follow intention, not convenience." Another whispered, "She designed with ethics." Before that was even a term. Ava smiled quietly to herself. In the adjacent seminar room, rows of students took notes as a professor clicked through slides titled, "Fashion as Memory, Personal Preservation as Resistance." Each image bore the same attribution: Miriam Sloan Collegians. Sloan Lineage Archive. On a side table sat a set of hardbound course readers. The cover a photo of Miriam at her drafting table, half smiling, thread coiled around her fingers like an heirloom passed between generations. That afternoon, Miriam herself arrived through the museum's service entrance. She moved slowly but with purpose, cane in one hand, her other resting lightly on Eva's arm as they made their way through the secured back hallway. She wore a soft plum wool coat over a cream blouse with shell buttons. Her eyes swept over the space like a curator, not a guest. "Are you sure you're up for this?" Eva asked. Miriam gave a faint smile. "This is the last one. I'll walk it through." In the gallery, a small camera crew adjusted lighting and set quiet instructions over headsets. A boom mic rose like a crane above the silent crowd. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Sloan," said the producer gently. She nodded once, then stepped forward. Her tour wasn't flashy. There was no dramatic speech, no posturing, just pauses, just care. She stopped in front of the 1965 silk dress. "This was hand-finished at 2 a.m., the night before my keynote. I'd spilled tea on the lining and re-hemmed it to hide the stain. It worked. Nobody knew." The crew chuckled softly. She moved to a display of embroidered gloves. These weren't meant to match anything. They were meant to last. Gloves used to say what your voice couldn't. And finally, the table where her preserved sketchbooks were laid open. She touched the glass gently. They said these were scribbles. They weren't, they were blueprints for care. She stepped back, eyes landing on a young woman near the rear of the group, sketchpad in hand, wide-eyed, hopeful. "For anyone wondering," Miriam said, her voice quiet but clear, "yes, it's worth documenting your version of beauty, even if they laugh. Especially if they do." The producer signaled a wrap. The lights dimmed slightly. No applause, just a quiet inhale across the room as if no one wanted to break the spell. Later in the staff room, Miriam sipped from a porcelain mug while Eva packed up the guest tote. "They want to run the full segment during National Archives Month," Eva said, sliding the lens caps back on. "Prime time. They're calling it The Woman Who Preserved Time." Miriam nodded. "Let them." Eva hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever think of showing them? Jake and Sienna?" Miriam didn't answer right away. She folded the tissue around the mug, then tucked it back into the bag. "I left them the receipts," she said softly. "What they do with the loss is up to them." She arrived alone, no coat, no makeup, no camera trailing behind her. Just Miriam Sloan in worn slacks, soft leather loafers, and a heathered shawl pinned at the collar with a button she'd saved from her first real suit. Her pace was slow but steady as she moved through the exhibit one last time. Not for press, not for posterity, just presence. The morning crowd at the Boulder College Gallery was light, weekday visitors with earbuds tucked under scarves and notebooks balanced in one hand. No one noticed her at first, just another woman walking among the glass. She paused briefly in front of the brocade vest. The tag, her handwriting had faded just slightly in the light. She smiled faintly, then adjusted the edge of the label with a gloved fingertip. Miriam Sloane, she turned to find a girl standing beside her, maybe 19. Auburn hair tucked into a denim cap, a fabric swatch notebook clutched to her chest. I just, I wanted to say thank you, the girl said, voice catching. Your story made me want to design, not just clothes, but things that mean something. Miriam studied her face, and for a moment it was like looking at a younger version of herself, not in features, but in spark, in urgency. What's your fabric of choice? Miriam asked. The girl blinked, surprised. Cotton lawn, clean lines. I like how it breathes. Miriam nodded, a full nod, not polite. Then you'll make things that breathe too. The girl beamed. April met her near the gift shop exit, wiping her hands on a scarf she'd been folding for a display. You didn't have to come today, she said. They're prepping for the documentary screening. Whole setup crew is in the back. Miriam shrugged. I wasn't coming for the camera. April hesitated, then pulled her into a hug. It lasted longer than it needed to. You changed everything, April whispered. Quietly. Completely. Miriam pulled back and smiled. No. I just reminded them not to throw away their mother's needle. Across town, movers wheeled the last of the boxes into a rented U-Haul. Jake handed off the key to a neutral-faced realtor. Sienna stood beside the car in oversized sunglasses and a half-buttoned coat, watching the neighborhood fade behind the rear window before the car even started. No public goodbye, no farewell post, just a quiet extraction, like a stain too stubborn to blend, too obvious to forget. Their new address was in Phoenix, smaller, farther, quieter. Neither one mentioned Miriam, but the silence between them felt like standing beside a closed museum door, knowing they were once inside something important, and walked out before understanding why it mattered. Back at the gallery, Eva stood on a stepladder, beneath the main title wall, aligning the final framed quote above the entrance arch. A new plaque, soft parchment background, deep brown serif. Elegance isn't youth, it's memory stitched in dignity. She stepped down, leveled it with care, then took a step back. Miriam watched from just beyond the archway, a canvas tote on her arm, her fingers wrapped loosely around a sprig of rosemary she'd cut from her garden that morning. I didn't think you'd make it, Eva said. I had one more walk to take. Outside, sunlight warmed the edge of the stone steps as Miriam descended them, her shawl catching gold in the early light. She didn't look back at the building behind her. She didn't need to. The legacy was sealed, not in marble, not in fame, but in notebooks opened with reverence and stitches passed hand to hand by girls who knew now what it meant to make something last. As she reached the edge of the sidewalk, she caught sight of a figure across the street, a woman in sharp heels and a tailored trench holding a phone she wasn't using, just standing, watching. Miriam paused. She didn't wave, didn't nod. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out a folded receipt from an old estate audit, and slipped it into a trash bin beside her as she walked on. Her voice, low and steady, echoed only in her mind. She gave me a tray of pity. I gave her back a receipt, and a legacy she'll never wear.